Hello and welcome to Children in Our Lives, a program where children and adults speak about violence against children. On this show, we discuss how we relate with our children, and today we will be tackling the issue of the chain of violence. We will feature a story of a child who experienced violence by someone who was venting her frustration on him, of course told by your favorite storyteller, Mr. Ranjezi Stephen. On the discussion panel today, we shall be chatting with Ms. Prosi Nakanjako from Raising Voices and Ms. Tina Musuya from the Center for Domestic Violence Prevention. For our special item, we bring to you Ms. Hilary Baserika, a community member but also a women and children rights activist who works hard to create awareness around the issue of violence in her community. But first, let's begin with a story. And as you listen to Subi's story, think about the children you know. Think about the children in your community. Think about the violence inflicted on them. What are your thoughts?
Good evening. Good evening. Very welcome to yet another storytelling session. I'm really glad to see all of you coming here, especially the young ones. Welcome, my sons. And I'm glad to see our visitors from other lands coming to listen to African way of education.
Most welcome.
Thank you.
Now, as I told you last time, storytelling is an old art in Africa. And as the Africans have always done, it was not only for fun, it always had great facts. And now, the stories I'm telling you are actually not just mere stories. They are true things that have happened. Tonight I'm telling you a story of a small boy, but because the story is actually true, this boy is still alive, the family is still there, I will change the name. I will change the name so that we protect him. So I'm giving him the name Subi. Subi. All right, Subi is a 9-year-old boy. Little, beautiful, wonderful boy. Subi lives with his stepmother and father. Subi's mother died when he was just 1 year old. And by the way, people say that the father had something to do with the death. But nobody dared say anything. Even at the funeral, they gave a speech, oh, she was a good person, no, she is irreplaceable. But nobody mentioned what had happened. But now, Subi is telling the story in a hospital. He is in a hospital, admitted in a ward. And he's telling this story with so much pain and showing the other patients and the other children and the people who are looking after the other patients a hand with a deep, bad wound. And Subi is explaining how he got this wound. Because someone had asked, how did you get this wound, boy? I said, this wound, I had come from school very hungry because I had not had breakfast at home in the morning. At school, we had no lunch. When I came home in the evening, there was no food. So my stepmother asked me to go and add more firewood in the kitchen where she was cooking beans so that the beans would cook. When I got there, very hungry, the scent, the aroma of the beans made me feel even more hungry. I looked around, she was not here, and I was sure she was not going to come because it was raining outside. I got a spoon, the wooden spoon she had been using to stir the food, and said, let me eat 1 or 2 beans. As soon as I dipped the beans, and before I could eat the first one, I heard noise behind. And when I looked back, my stepmother was standing there, her eyes as red as the fire. And before I could explain, she got my hand, got a piece of wood with fire and put it on my palm. I cried, I screamed, but she went on. That is how I got this wound. Everybody was so touched. Everybody was crying. But they were also looking at Subi's stepmother with the bad eye. But
Was she there?
she was seated there because she was the one looking after Subi. No, she was also crying. People, that's exactly what people are saying. You are crying crocodile tears. You are the one who inflicted the pain. But she said, my son Subi, please forgive me. And people are saying,
Forgive what?
And because just as angry as you were, that's how everybody was reacting. So what she did, she unbuttoned her gomesi and removed her arms and turned her back to the people. What they saw made everybody scared. The whole back had lots of wounds and marks and scars, and the whole back, some in straight lines, others in circles, others interlocking. The whole back was total unsightly. They said, what happened to you? What happened? And the woman explained that every time she asked Subi's father, her husband, for money to buy food, the man brought a cigarette butt with fire and put it direct on her back
If I got that one.
so that it could be a reminder. The number of burns were supposed to be the number of times she had got money from the husband. It was the husband, but was saying, you are always the one asking for money. This is how much money I have given you. And every time the woman wanted to run away, the man was said, your family will have to pay me money equivalent to the number of marks on your back. So because her family was poor, she could not run away to go back to her parents. And so, as soon as she saw Subi going to eat these beans which had caused her all these injuries, she couldn't control herself. She grabbed the boy and inflicted the same pain that had been inflicted on her. So the point in this story is, how can we as human beings value other useless things like money more than life? How can we go on creating conditions of suffering which gets passed on from one to the other and eventually ending with the children? You may find such a thing has happened to you. Such a thing has happened to someone you know. If you don't, I tell you, this is a true story. It's likely to happen to someone that you know. Therefore, we need to find a way to do something to prevent the suffering, especially of young, innocent children like these ones. That's the end of the story for today.
Right now, I have Ms. Prosi Nakanjoko, Senior Program Officer at Raising Voices, and Ms. Tina Musuya, the Executive Director at the Center for Domestic Violence Prevention. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Thank you.
What do you think of the story? Let me just start with you, Tina. What do you think of the story?
That story of Subi is really sad, and unfortunately, these are the realities of many children out there. It is happening every day in our homes, and people just think it's normal. They think a parent is punishing their child, and that's it. And this is a typical case of violence against children, which also in our laws is a crime. It's a crime against the children and it's abuse of their rights. It's both domestic violence and the general violence against children. We can see it was all thriving on the silence. She had been silent about the cigarette bans for a very long period of time. All the anger was building and building. Silence does not solve any problem. We can see now it led to the violence being transferred to poor Suvi, who was so young and innocent.
Yeah, because if you hold it all in one day, you can explode.
Exactly.
Well, Prosi, here we're talking about the chain of violence. What exactly do you mean by a chain?
You know, this story of Subi is very elaborate. You see, violence is happening to one person, and this other person is getting frustrated and venting her frustration on another person. Her stepmother, Subi's stepmother, is suffering from violence from her husband, and she keeps all this violence to herself. She keeps all this anger to herself, and then when she gets an opportunity, she vents this anger on Subi. You know, she's thinking to herself that, you know, I'm paying a very high price for the food that everyone is eating. You know, every time she has to get food, she has to get a ban. Every time she has to get food, and it's happening every day. So when she finds this child eating from some of the food, she is so full, she can't help herself. She's so frustrated. And there she says, yes, I have to do exactly what is being done to me. And I'm not saying that it's right, you know, it's wrong. So violence shouldn't happen to anyone. You know, violence against a woman is always vented out on the children. So the husband is causing this violence, and then the mother, the stepmother, is venting this violence on someone who is weaker than her.
That's right.
And if I'm to add on what Prosi was just explaining, we can see that this was all being built up from the silence that had been ongoing, because we can see from the story the woman had several bans for over many years, and she had been silent for all these years.
So Prosi, what do you think is the root cause of this? Why does it happen this way?
Okay, I think it's the status quo in our communities. We find that in many times there is hierarchies of power in our communities. You see that some people are up there and other people are at the periphery. You find that the men are the first on top in many societies in our country, and they are the most feared.
Oh, yes.
They are almighty. And you find that the women are next in the hierarchy, and then the children are below at the periphery. So in this case, if the person up there in the hierarchy, if they abuse their power, which means that if they beat their wives, these wives will keep the anger, and when the opportunity prevails itself, they will vent this anger to the next person who is below. Why? They can't beat the almighty. They can't beat the person who is up there. They definitely have to find a weaker person whom they will revenge on. And then in turn, if this child is beaten and the child is only 14 years, they will not revenge on another child who is 16. They'll find a weaker child who is younger than them, and they will revenge on that one. So you will see that, you know, this power abuse is hierarchical. So the person who holds more power will abuse that person who holds less power. And that's why you see that this chain is going on.
And as Prosi has explained, this is not a one-off act, it is a pattern. It becomes the behavior of that person who is having more power over the other. So they keep doing things that are abusive to the other person who they think is much lower than them.
So do you feel that this happens only at home, or does it happen in other places as well?
It happens everywhere. You find that it happens even in schools. For instance, many times we have people who hold more power in schools, the teachers over their classes. There is this a cliche by most teachers that if children don't fear you, then they won't respect you. So they use all tactics, right from humiliation, you know, verbal abuses, that, yeah, you child, you are stupid. You can't even understand this simple number, humiliating the child, making them feel even smaller than they already feel. And then if that doesn't work, they use the cane. You know, you find that the teacher is teaching one hand with a chalk, another hand with a cane. And this is how they control their classes. You know, it's believed that if you don't control the class through humiliation, through violence, children won't understand, which is not true. So you see that the power misuse also in the classroom is really high. And then, because these children study in fear, they are humiliated, they are beaten, they'll wait. If the teacher is not there, give them break time, you'll see them, the bigger ones, bullying the smaller ones. You know, we ask ourselves, where is bullying coming from?
Where does bullying come from?
Have you found a small child in a school bullying a bigger one?
No.
It's definitely the bigger children who will bully the smaller one.
Tina,
Yes.
what do you think are the consequences of this chain of violence?
Oh, when I think about the consequences, I even want to scream out loud because they are enormous. Unfortunately, they will not stop, not until we do something. The first one is the transgenerational violence, where we are transferring the violence from one generation to the next one, because as you can see, the children are growing up thinking, oh, when I grow up, this is what I will do. So that's one of
I'll
it.
have my child.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that beating is right, you know.
Exactly.
Beating someone who is smaller than you is right.
Then secondly, violence doesn't teach anyone anything. It brings on, it evokes only those bad feelings of revenge, of the drive to abuse others again, because once someone is beaten, for example, they will also want revenge on someone else because we caused physical and emotional pain to that person. And the other part is people grow up without love. When someone does not experience love, because it's very likely that where there is violence, there's very less love. So if someone has not been loved, they are not able to love as well. They will often be people who want to hurt others. They just don't respect anyone. You keep wondering, I took my child to a good school, paid a lot of school fees. Why are they behaving like this? But it's because they were never loved, they were never treated values, important values about interaction with others, so they'll be behaving in very unbecoming behavior. Then of course we see things like children don't perform well in school because they are worried, and they are worried about the violence at home, and there's nothing, you know, for children, most children before the age of 13, their heroes are their parents. But if parents are using violence against the children don't have anything important to live for anyway. So that affects their performance, and that's the time when they are forming their personal characters. So it really affects the progress and the innovativeness of this child. And we even see children come up with deviant behaviors like smoking, drinking, and even indulging in sex at an early age, because that could be a place where they are getting some solace. They are quite, the problems are endless.
I would like also to add the issue of loss of self-esteem, because if someone is abused all the time, if someone is not respected at all, they lose self-esteem.
Exactly.
They don't feel like anyone cares about how they feel. Children will not participate in class because they fear that if I make a mistake, then they are going to shout at me, then they are going to beat me if I make a mistake. So they'll keep within themselves. And you see that they will be isolated.
So that brings us to an important question now. Can this chain be broken? What can we do to break it?
There's a saying which is so popular among people, that spare the rod and spoil the child.
Yeah.
That, I really strongly disagree with that. People need to know that there are different ways in which to instill values in children. If you take, for example, our past tradition, our great ancestors used not to beat children, but they used to instill values to them through storytelling, talking, and they had other ways. You can see they were so close to the children. They would explain to children, if you did this and this and this, these are the consequences. This thing is done in 1, 2, 3 ways. Unfortunately, these days, people do not explain to children.
People don't have time as well.
They expect a 3-year-old child to behave like a 25-year-old person. So what do? They are trying to skip that parenting role.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming in.
You're welcome.
Today we speak with Madame Hilary Baserka, who is doing some very good work in her community. Madame Hilary,
hello.
Welcome to the show. I understand that you are an activist trying to prevent violence against children. What exactly does it mean to be an activist?
Nyabo kwewaayo mukola ekintu kyonna ng'okyagala. Kati nganze Hilary neewaayo okulaba nti nwanirira eddembe ly'abaana mu community.
Do you get very many cases of children being abused?
Nyabo wale ekibuuzo ekyo emisango tufuna mingi. Abaana abatulugunyizibwa awaka baturipotingira. Abaana abatulugunyizibwa mu masomero baturipotingibwa emisango mingi nnyo egitutuuseeko okuva mu bitundu ebimaze okusomesebwa.
Since you started doing this work, have you seen any changes in the way that people are treating children in your community?
Kyetwenyumizamu ekitulyamu essanyu nti enjawulo eriwo eyafuna amawulire tatudde ajja n'atutegeeza mangu. Bw'aba ategeeza poliisi ate nga poliisi eraba erina weetwetaagira okugenda okukansolinga era tugenda mangu ne tuba nga twogera nabo era enjawulo ne tumanya nti awo ekitundu ekyo kimaze okutegeera poliisi kyeki Makerere 1 kyeki oba raising gyeri. Kati awo enjawulo weeri nnene entonotono efuniddwa naye nga tetutudde era tukyayongera okusaasaanya ki amawulire. Enjawulo mu masomero abasomesa abamu ababadde batulugunya abaana twenyumiza tika tulina omusomesa abadde akuba ennyo abaana mu ssomero erimu lwakisomesa yagobebwa wadde akuba omwana n'atuuka ku stage omwana ey'okuzirika. Katulaba nti enjawulo weeri mu ssomero eryo abaana bawulira eddembe. Headmaster teyatuula yamugobera ne tica oyo wenjogerera kati takyali tica anoonya mirimu mirala kubanga ffe kyetutaagala tica oyo atagende mu ssomero ddala taatawaanya abaana abalala era abatulugunye.
Lastly, I mean, considering the work you do and the cases you have seen, do you have any message that you want to share with the people in your community and to everyone who is watching this show?
Abatuwuliriza abalungi era abatulaba obubaka bwe mbalekera kwe kulaba nti gwe nange kitukwata ku ddembe ly'abaana. Tosirika. Neighbor atulugunya omwana tosirika. Omusomesa atulugunya omwana, headmaster tosirika. Police balese case omwana atulugunyiziddwa tobisirisa. Labanga oyongera okulaba omuzadde oyo ategedde lwaki yakangavula omwana oyo ayambiddwa. Era abalungi abatulaba essaawa zino ngezaako kwongera obbawo obubaka baleme kutuula. Nebaawo ng'atulugunya omwana tuukira ekitongole kyaffe Makerere 1 Community Initiative okulira na revenue oba awali ofisi za umeme oba okutuukirira raising voices oba poliisi oba ebitongole ebirala oba LC kende waba atwala abakyala oba chairman oba vice yenna yina ogomanya ali kakiiko oba ali ku ddembe ly'abaana mutuukirire tuyambe abaana abo kwabe bakulembeze b'enkya.
So you see, it takes you and me and him and her, everyone, to break the chain of violence. You have the power, so use it. Join us again next week, same time. Bye-bye.